Today, I'm Dr. Margaret Rutherford. I'm a clinical psychologist out of Fayetteville, Arkansas. If some of you don't know where Arkansas is, as I used to say to people when I would occasionally go to Europe and they'd go, well, where is Arkansas? I'd say, it's right next to Texas. And they say, okay, I got it. Anyway, I'm glad to be here with all of you. So many of us had horrible snow within the last couple of weeks and inches and inches of snow, and we had the same thing here in Arkansas. And so I hope that you've got water and electricity and shelter and warmth. It's now 75 degrees out the outside for us today, so we're definitely warming up. But gosh, it's been 2021 is turning out to be quite the year itself. But I'm delighted to be here with you. I've been doing lives for the mighty for about 4.5 years, once a month, usually on Wednesdays at this point. And I'm always delighted to come on and talk with all of you. In fact, I need to switch my comments. So I looked at them. Hello, Monica. Monica is a member of my Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/selfworth. That is not Monica. She loves Celine Dion. So she is quite the Celine fan. So I first thought when I saw her picture, I thought, gosh, she looks a lot like Celine Dion. And then I realized that was not her. She's a great lady. Hi from Sydney. Wow, Michelle, what is it, late for you? Yeah, or I think you're like 8 or 9 or even 10 hours later. Oh, well, Derman, I don't really answer to sweetheart, but I'll say hello. Anyway, I'm here to talk about self-esteem. I'll tell you a little bit about me just so we can welcome some more folks on. I've been a psychologist now for this will be 28 years. It's 6 a.m., Michelle. Well, I'm glad you're up. For about 28 years now in private practice, and I didn't do any social media until 2012, and I began blogging back then. My son left for college, and I thought, well, what have I got to do? And so I started blogging, and then I started podcasting. My podcast is the Selfworth podcast, and I'd love to have you over there. Hello from Springfield, Missouri. Oh, you're a stone's throw away. Enjoy all your videos. Oh, thank you, Mandy, so much. I actually even had a patient drive all the way from Springfield to see me every 2 weeks there for about 2 years. It was delightful. I was very flattered that he would drive that far, but it also, kept anyone from knowing he was in therapy, I guess. But anyway, I've been to Springfield. It's a wonderful little town. Anyway, so I do Facebook Lives, but I also have written a book called Perfectly Hidden Depression. Sorry, I lost my train of thought there for a second. And that is out on Amazon and Barnes and Noble and everywhere you can find books. It's there. And we don't have to talk about that today. Maybe I will talk about Perfectly Hidden Depression here soon in the next couple of months. But we're here to talk about self-esteem. I don't know about you, but certainly in the during COVID and this pandemic, many of the ways that I have felt like I could increase my self-esteem have not been possible necessarily to do, certainly not easily, because as I'm older, I needed to stay away from the gym. I needed to stay away, from a lot of things that maybe younger people felt a little safer to do, but certainly I did not. And so, the things that your visits with friends and family, you're working out, you're going to classes that mean something to you, we've been just curtailed from so much of that. I was laughing. Sometimes I'm not laughing during this period of time, but I had a bad weekend this past weekend, frankly. But, I told my husband one day, I said, the first time I sit down in a restaurant and someone walks up to me and says, "What may I bring you?" I think I may start just sobbing. I just think I may start, oh my God, somebody's waiting on me. But anyway, I do think it's been harder, and certainly I've been seeing people all during the pandemic, and it's something that I just think needs to be talked about right now, because there have just been many blows to self-esteem. And, when I say the word self-esteem, um, people really say, well, what exactly is that? And I will tell you what I think it is. I think self-esteem is really, or when you have it, or when you can say, yes, I think I'm someone with pretty good self-esteem. I think your life lines up with your values. What I mean by that is when I say, let's say I value creativity. I think I like to be creative, or I value creativity. Or I value creativity in other people. I think when you have self-esteem, your life will reflect that value. If you value love, or if you value giving, or if you value curiosity, if you value, if you value building things, if you value laughter, if that your life will actually reflect that, meaning that what you feel on the inside, what's important to you inside, you're also seeing in your life, I'm living this out. And I think that gives you good self-esteem. Oh, Alicia says sitting down in a restaurant would be very nice. Yes. Um, yes. So I think that what is so hard for some people is they feel as if they are not in control of that they don't have, let's say they value creativity. I'm a creative person, so I guess I go there easily. Um, and yet I'm not doing anything creative in my life, that I'm stuck, or I haven't picked up I'm not an artist, but I haven't picked up my pad and paper, or I haven't drawn anything, or I haven't sculpted anything, or I haven't written a piece of music, or then that is not getting reflected in my life, and so my sense of self-esteem goes down. Now, Michelle has a question: is there a difference between self-love and self-esteem? Oh, and then Andrew, I want to get to Andrew's point too. I think so. Michelle, as I think about that, and again, I'm not looking up any textbooks about the difference, but my own just kind of knee-jerk reaction to that is, I think I can love myself. I can love the person that I am. I can see things in myself that are lovable, and therefore I'm going to love that they're there. But I might be stymied in, is that actually present in my everyday life? I think self-esteem means that you feel competent at certain things. And again, my point is that if your competencies line up with what you value, that's even more important. So that when you can love yourself. I'm important because I exist. Oh, that makes me think about Christopher Reeves. Y'all probably remember him as Superman. He was, I think, the original movie of Superman, and he was an actor, and he had a horrible, tragic riding accident, and he lost all feeling from his neck down, and he couldn't move. And I have not read his biography, but I have had patients who've told me about it, and they say that I think I did read an article about it, that he actually begged his doctors to end his life, because he said, I can't be who I am anymore. I mean, I can't do anything. I can't be anybody. And yet he got to a place where he loved what he could do. Now, obviously, his self-esteem, he was going to have to, and he found ways to he found ways to show about his values, or demonstrate his values, even with that kind of paralysis, which was amazing. He was amazing. But I think that's the difference between loving yourself and then your life being one that you can look at and say, I feel some worth about this. I feel some value in this. Let me go back to, yes, thank you, camera. I prefer self-compassion. It's not dependent on creating something. It's just loving what is. I like that. Sure. self-compassion is something I think is tremendously important. And as far as its tie in with self-esteem, I think that self-compassion, I'll define it, or at least, again, I don't have Webster's dictionary sitting here in front of me, but if I were to define it, I would say that it is it's honoring those things that about you that you feel empathy for, that you feel. Isn't it funny when we have words and we're trying to define words using other words? Um, you have love toward yourself. You have understanding toward yourself, and that is your self-compassionate. And a lot of people are not. A lot of people, in fact, discount the things that happen to them, and they're not compassionate with themselves. And they'll say, "Well, that happens to everybody," and they don't know how to show compassion toward themselves. So they'll say that's weak or whatever. It's not. It's just going back and acknowledging, that some things were hard for you, or some things are hard for you. You can be compassionate about your life right now. Um, as the pandemic has definitely called for. I mean, how many times have I heard someone open a sentence saying, "Well, I know I'm not as bad off as everyone else, but my uncle came down with COVID and I'm worried about him." Well, that's still, you can show self-compassion by saying, "And I love my uncle, and no, he didn't die, but he may have some, consequences of the disease. And so, you don't know yet. And so the fact that you're confused or you're grieving or you're sad, you can have compassion for that." Um, let me see. Can you, okay, Mary Jones says, "What's the difference between self-worth and self-esteem?" I don't think much. I think they're used pretty interchangeably, actually, Mary Joan or Joanne. I'm not sure how to say that. I think they're mostly, I mean, again, I think if there were distinctions, they would be subtle, maybe more subtle than I would understand. So I think that those are interchangeable. I've said that now about 5 times. Lisa, can you truly love others when you don't love yourself due to mental health issues like depression? Well, that's a tough question, isn't it? Because when I would make the distinction, Lisa, between not loving the fact that you have depression, which would be hard to find anybody that loved having depression. I think there'll be people who tell you their depression taught them some things, maybe humility, maybe patience, maybe courage, but they still love themselves. So, I think that maybe a helpful thing to wonder about or think about would be, if you can't do that, if you're struggling to do that, are you seeing yourself as overly identified with depression? Now, the deeper the depression, I understand the harder that is. Okay. I'm not discounting that at all. I have panic disorder. And in fact, often when I'm speaking at things like this, I have to, if this were live, I might have had to kind of help myself out a little bit. But I'm used to doing this now, so I don't panic when I say it. But I used to go from therapist to therapist when I first started having panic attacks and saying, "I want to get rid of these panic attacks. I hate them." And basically, I finally found a therapist that said to me, "You're saying you hate yourself. You hate the panic. You hate what the panic does to you. You hate what the panic has taken away from you. But if you say you hate, you know, you've got to get rid of this thing that is a part of you, then that's not accepting its presence." And so I think that you can love yourself. You cannot like the impact of a mental illness. But if you accept it, then you're much more able to manage it. That may sound kind of overly semantic, but I guess I'm trying to make the distinction between that you have to accept your depression as part of what you're experiencing in life, but you don't have to equate it with who you are. That's what I'm trying to say. I hope that's helpful. Monica, She says, self-compassion is hard with perfectly hidden depression. Um, yes, it is. And Monica's bringing up perfectly hidden depression, which is something I've written about. And it is a it is a overlooked presentation of depression that doesn't look like depression. That's why it's overlooked. It is, sorry, I just spilled my tea right before we came on, so I'm gonna have to clear my throat a good deal. Um, it is an overlooked presentation of depression that looks like the perfect looking life. And in fact, what she's speaking about is that um, often those people are so disconnected from their emotions, or if you're one of them, you're so disconnected with your emotion, any kind of painful emotion, any kind of embarrassment, fear, anger, sadness, that you just kind of live in this superficial place, this very closed off, although you look to everyone like you're successful and wonderful, you still emotionally are very restricted. And so you don't have self-compassion. You don't have that ability to have a softer, gentler kind of look at yourself. So it is more difficult. Um, thank you for that, Camera. I'm about perfectly hidden depression. Preach that. Appreciate it. Alyssa, I think it's important when one has mental health issues that they don't lose themselves by taking care of others and not taking care of ourselves. Personal opinion, dealing with mental health issues for over 40 years. I would totally agree. You can get lost. In fact, I've had some people who've actually gone into residential treatment. And so these are people who are probably actively suicidal, or certainly their problems are monumental enough to warrant residential treatment. And what I'll hear from the staff is that they're taking care of everybody else. They're focusing on why someone else is here, not why they're here. And you can certainly do that in real life as well. I mean, it's real life to be in a residential treatment facility, but it's a little different. Um, and so you're right. I think people can totally stop, working on their own self-worth, and seeing themselves as valuable and what their needs are. Those needs are valuable as well. And so you can, and again, I think if we go back to the first thing I said, which was that my working definition of self-esteem would be if your life is reflecting a value that you have inside. If self-compassion is a value, being compassionate is a value you have inside, then you being compassionate with others would be a reflection of that, but also being compassionate with yourself. So that's not feeling sorry for yourself. That's not blaming your parents. That's not blaming your ex-husband or ex-wife. That's not staying in a bitter place. That's just being compassionate with yourself. Um, let's see. Ted, does having more self-esteem with the help of spouse or family make it harder to find self-esteem on your own? Huh. Good question. Well, certainly if you are loved well by other people, um, and if you have a place inside of you that can absorb that love and that appreciation, at times we all need that. At times, I mean, there are times certainly when I'm really down on myself and my husband looking at me or my son saying, Mom, I think you're pretty terrific, or, something like that. Yeah, will that help me? Is it kind of like throwing a rope ladder down to somebody in a well and saying, there is a way out? Sure. They're reminding me that whatever negative spiral my own thinking has gotten into, that they don't see me that way. They see that I'm distressed. They see that I'm sad or that I'm angry with myself, but they're handing me that rope ladder that I've got to climb. The problem becomes, Ted, for me, when I see people who probably because of childhood trauma, probably because of abuse or neglect, don't have that sponge inside of them. And so when they do, what I mean by that is a place where you can absorb when you receive compliments, when you receive emotional support, when you receive positive things from your family, your friends, whoever loves you. And what happens is it hits you and then it just falls off. This happens a lot with people with borderline personality disorder because they don't have a very solid, stable sense of self or love for themselves or appreciation for who they are because it wasn't given to them. And whatever positive comes back, it'll just flow off, right? So, what can happen in this situation where you are dependent on that and you don't have it within yourself is that people can get burned out doing this. They're constantly trying to tell you, why do you hate yourself? I love this about you and I love that about you, and you can hear none of it and it just falls off. Then that's a problem. That's when you really need to probably work with a therapist or someone, or in some way work on trying to stand still and absorb that positive feedback from other people. It can be very hard to show love to someone when you're, oops, it went away. Oh, you're welcome. Okay. Thank you. It can be very hard to show love to someone when your depression makes you feel so low that you hate yourself. Yes, it can. I mean, again, I want to point out though, Mario, and I understand fully that the more depressed you are, the more difficult it is to distinguish between you and your depression. But yes, it can be hard to externalize anything. You don't laugh, you don't give, you don't care. Really severe depression. I like to talk about it is that your energy turns inward. You're imploding. Your world is imploding, like like that. And so sound effects are free. You're imploding. So you lose that ability to reach out to others, and that's where the work of depression is to try to push that out. And it's hard work. You have to make yourself do something you don't particularly want to do, and you don't have the energy to do it, and you don't have the motivation to do it, and you don't know why you even think it's a good idea just because somebody told you that it was a good idea. But it's the sticky wicket of treating depression, is that you have to somehow find something that is important enough to you to push out of that implosive energy coming in and care about someone else or something else. I want to go quickly before these are wonderful questions. And I'm so glad we're having such a great discussion. It's kind of looks like some of you are talking with one another, and that's okay. It confuses me a little bit, but that's all right. I've been confused before. I want to talk about some of these practical exercises that I have given to people and there are 3 of them that who are really down on themselves, who are struggling with self-esteem. And again, some of these people are, you would never guess that they didn't care for themselves. They were what's called, self-loathing. So one was a local professional, and she came from an extremely abusive background. But she had been very successful and is in a giving profession as well. So she was highly regarded in the community as being a wonderful giver. And one of her parents was sent to prison for something, and it's like something cracked open in her. And she came into therapy, not really. She said, "I never thought I would do this," but she came in anyway. And what we kept running into was her basically insistence that or her let's just say her running dialogue with herself, that she really was the things that her father had called her, and she really at the core, if anyone really knew her, they would think this about her. So what I had her do was to challenge those projections. They're basically projections. What projections are is what you start believing yourself. You tell yourself that other people feel that way about you. Like if I was projecting something onto all of you, if I was thinking, oh, this is horrible, and why did I just make that joke about clearing my throat or whatever I did with my throat? And I would say, I bet they hated that. That's me projecting that onto you. If I still think, oh, that was kind of funny, and I hope I made them laugh, then I'm projecting that maybe you thought it was funny. We project things all the time. So I wanted her to challenge the projections. Okay. So basically, what I asked her to do was to find as many as she wanted to, 10, 15 people. And from her past and in different parts of her past, and just to say, if you had to describe me in one word, what would that be? And I said, if you feel silly doing it, just tell them your therapist told you to do it. We therapists are always asking people to do weird stuff. So she did. And she came in and she showed me this list. And I think she told some other people the actual descriptors. So I'm not going to say that on air. But one of them was as especially enlightening to her. Let's just say this isn't it, but let's just say you remind me of a soaring eagle. It was something like that. And she said, and she just began tearing up, and she said, it never would have occurred to me that someone would look at me and think I was a soaring eagle for them. I mean, it just floored her. So sometimes when you are telling yourself things in your own mind that are very negative, you can challenge those projections and see how other people really feel about you. Let me check in. Somehow we're talking about, okay, great. Thanks, Cameron, because I'm a little lost in the comments. Does unresolved grief affect one's self-esteem? What does one do to help when they're sad and they have no real self-esteem? Another really good question. I think grief can affect anything. I mean, unresolved grief, that could be about a death, a divorce, abuse, some childhood issue that you have grief about. It could be about the pandemic. It could be about so many things. And so I think when it's the word unresolved that I think that gets my attention. Grief, of course, is normal. Grief is something we're all going to feel and feel many times in our lifetime. But the fact that it's unresolved, I think, it depends on what that looks like. Does that look like you're angry all the time? Does that look like there's a chip on your shoulder? Does that look like you can't care about others because you're just wandering around in your grief? I mean, yes, because what you value is no longer getting reflected in your life. So if that unresolved grief is getting in the way of you having some kind of connection between what you value on the inside and what you're doing on the outside, then definitely it can. And then what does one do to help when they are sad? See, I'm getting a little confused because I think you can have self-esteem and be sad. Um, it's if your sadness is so profound that, again, you're not living a life that you feel that you want to live in here. Let's say you value giving to others, but you're so sad or you have this grief that you can't find the energy to give to others. Well, if you were sitting in front of me and that was the scenario, I would say you're thinking too big. And in fact, that's my next one. You have to think smaller than that, because in order to address the sadness and to feel like you're so paralyzed by the sadness, you have to, or you don't have to, you can choose to look at yourself and say, okay, I don't have the energy to do what I normally would do. I don't have that energy. I do have the energy to text someone and let them know I'm thinking about them. I do have the energy to whatever it is, X, Y, or Z, that also is about giving to other people. And so you can begin to crawl out of that sense of paralysis of these emotions by starting very small and not discounting the fact that you're starting small. Well, I only did this. Well, yesterday you were paralyzed by sadness and you couldn't do it. And so I would counter that if you want to start, that you start very, very small. It kind of, the reason why I say it's my second point, I talk a lot about on my podcast, I've talked about it all the time. What can you do about it? What do you do about it? And a woman named Liz came into my practice years ago. It was before I was still in Dallas. And she had left a very abusive relationship. And she actually was having a lot of success doing it, but she had absorbed so many negative, critical comments from her ex-husband that they were, she'd get home and they just, bam, they hit her in the gut. And so, and she would just say, see, I can't get rid of these thoughts. I'm just stupid. I'll never be able to live my life by myself. And that's what he told me. So I quickly said, no, wait a minute. So let's get pragmatic. When you walk in your apartment at night, what is happening that you start pummeling yourself with these thoughts? And she said, oh, she started laughing. She says, I know exactly what it is. I said, what is it? And she said, well, it's because I flick on the light, can't see anything. I flick on the light switch and the bulb is out, and it's been out for months. And as soon as I realize there's no light, I say, oh, you should have changed that light bulb. And I'm stupid and I'll never do it, blah, blah, blah. So I said, do you have a light bulb? She goes, no. I said, do you know where you could buy a light bulb? Yes. Do you have to measure the light bulb? No. Do you have a ladder? Yes. Okay. So we set a day and a time that she'd go get the light bulb. We set another day and time that she would put the ladder in front of the light. Then another day and time, like 7:37 on Thursday night, that she'd get up on the ladder and change the light. And she said, why so many times? And I said, because I want you to notice in between times what your mind does to yourself. When you say, it's like you're getting eager to do something that will help. And that's the kind of energy you want to create. And so she did it. And she all of a sudden said, I just make things too hard. I make things as proof that my ex-husband was correct, when really I'm just not breaking it down into small enough steps. And that's why I made the connection between this, what you can do about it, and making sure you're not making that too big. Because when you're depressed, when you're anxious, you can't do that. You're setting yourself up for self-loathing and low self-esteem. Alyssa, love your accent. Oh, my accent? I'm from the South. Oh, goodness, y'all are nice. Let's see. Oh, thank you. Camera Ruan says she's wonderful. I probably crucified your last name. Hyper independence affects my everyday life due to my PTSD and past trauma. My severe anxiety is caused by my PTSD. I end up more depressed. It becomes hard to get out and separate yourself from it. Okay, so if I'm understanding this correctly, Mariana, you want to be as independent as you possibly can be. You call that hyper independence. And I guess you don't want to count on anybody. It's probably trust issues. It's probably, feeling like if you control things that you can't be hurt, maybe something like that. But you also have severe anxiety. And so you end up becoming more depressed to get out and separate yourself from it. Okay, so what I would do, I think if I understand your question correctly, where I'd start wondering with you is, how good are you at identifying your triggers, both your little triggers and your big triggers for your PTSD? And how else, okay, so I'd look at that first and say, all right, I need to look, again, what you can do about it. I need to look at some of those smaller triggers that are triggering my anxiety. And how can I begin to slowly expose myself to them and tell myself, okay, this is safe, this is secure, I'm okay. Ground yourself in the present, all those anxiety lessening techniques that PTSD people, talk about. You want to make sure you're staying in the present, not back in the past. So there's something like that to work on. But also, if the hyper independence is an issue, then you might also think about, or talk with your therapist about, or whatever, can I find one person that I can begin to try to trust? Is there no one in my world? Maybe your therapist is the first person you trust. Well, that's a start. And so, how could you begin to work on that, being so caught up in doing it all yourself, that is anxiety provoking in and of itself. So those are some of my first thoughts. It sounds like this is all pretty complex for you. And so I'm hoping that you're working with a therapist about this. Let's go with the third one, and then I'll get back to your questions because I can see there's a whole lot of conversation. So my anxiety gets so bad, it's hard to get out of the house. So, let me get to that in a second. Okay, so this is another exercise, and especially for those people who are talking about having anxiety. This is a really, really good one. A lot of people will come into my office and say, I feel so bad about myself because I'm stuck. I'm stuck in my anxiety. I'm stuck in my depression. I'm stuck in my sadness. Unresolved grief. I'm just stuck. And I just can't change. Okay. So what I might say to them is, all right, so between now and you can tell I'm sort of I can be conceptual, but I also think sometimes it's important to just get pragmatic. Okay. So I say, all right, in between now and your next session, almost every day, if not every day, I'd like you to do one of two things. One, do something that you've always wanted to do but never done. That's the first one. And that would be like driving down a street you'd never driven down, or you've always walked past a kumquat in the grocery store, and or a yam, or I don't know, some kind of plum or something, and you've never, I wonder what that tastes like, and you've never tasted it. Just buy one. Or, some stick of gum you've never tried. I don't care what it is. Go to a bookstore and pick up a magazine you've never read, but you've always been kind of curious about it. So something you've always wanted to do, but never done. But I also want the other thing to do is to be something that if your best friends were here, they would say, oh, Margaret would never do that. So I want you, at least for one of those things, it to be a small thing that you have always told yourself or your friends or laughed about, oh, I would never do that. I wouldn't be caught dead doing that, and do it. Now, these are not life-altering things. This is not causing havoc. These are small things. I remember when I first started, my mother taught me don't go out without makeup on, right? Because I was supposed to be a proper Southern lady to go with the accent. And so I didn't for a long time. And then I thought, well, that's a bunch of hooey. And so, but I can remember the first time I did it, I thought people were going to look at me, oh, and obviously that didn't happen. But that was, it was really not a big deal that I went out of the house without makeup. But for me, it was kind of something that I would never do, that I went on and did. And now I do it all the time. So, well, I'll tell you about this lady. So anyway, she came back in the next session. She said, I thought your assignment was one of the stupidest that I'd ever heard. And I said, well, okay. And she said, but I did it. And I ended up having lunch with someone, and all I was talking about was what I had done. Those little things that I tried, those little fresh things that I had always wanted to do and never done. And I found out that I can change. I'm just starting. Again, it's kind of tied to the second one. I was just starting out too big. And so again, you want to make sure that you're breaking it down into very doable, pragmatic things. Now, let me pick up some of the questions in the next few minutes. What exactly is PTSD? How can we recognize it, and how can we help a person that has been diagnosed with it? Hey, Laura. Well, PTSD is not the most easy thing to just kind of wrap up in a few sentences. True PTSD, it's post-traumatic stress disorder. The trauma is defined by the diagnostic criteria that you have to meet to actually be diagnosed with PTSD. The trauma has to be way outside of normal human experience. So this has to be a rape or a murder or in the military, or having a tornado rip through your town, or something that is out of the ordinary not ordinary human experience. And then the post-traumatic part of it is even after that has happened, you're having strong emotional reactions to it. You're having flashbacks and nightmares. You're either hyper aroused and hyper vigilant, or you completely shut down emotionally. You do a lot of things to avoid any kind of a situation that might remind you of that, or you're actually drawn to that. Um, Usually a lot of emotional instability. Um, I'm probably forgetting some of them. I know I'm forgetting some of them. Um, but that's basically what PTSD is. And then there's a thing called CPTSD, which is not actually a official diagnosis, but it's called chronic PTSD or complex PTSD. And what that means is that those events happened regularly and and more than once in someone's life. So if your mother or your father brought a lot of people in and they molested you, and that happened over and over and over again, something like that, can cause what's called CPTSD. So um, you said, what can you do about it if it's you? And I think your last part of your question was if it's someone you love has it. Oh, thank you. Well, PTSD is something that is, well, I want to say it's not easier to diagnose in yourself, but you certainly know you went through trauma. Now, I've had people, I will say, I've had people, and I won't mention the instances because they're kind of they're I don't want you to walk away with that picture in your head, but my patient will say something to me that happened to them that is truly traumatic, and they'll go, "Oh, yeah, it wasn't a big deal." No, it was a big deal. And so sometimes we can deny that something was traumatic, but you're still having PTSD symptoms. So, uh, and a lot of people who go untreated who have PTSD are very agitated, angry people. They don't really, their emotions are all over the place. They're usually trying to sedate them. They could often be led to sedate themselves with drugs or alcohol. And you know, that sometimes is and in fact, look how many military people die by suicide because um, I just read something that said that actually it's not lifetime military people that do that. It's people who had they did a stand in Afghanistan or Iraq or something, and they come back and they struggle. They have PTSD and they struggle. So I in m making sure that someone, or at least you saying, there are ways for you to get help with this. I think that EMDR is a really effective treatment for PTSD. What is EMDR? It's eye movement desensitization and reprocessing therapy, and it's a therapy that was specifically designed for trauma, and it can be very, very helpful in allowing you to remember the event without the emotional baggage. So, if anytime you think about the tornado going through your house, you are going through your town and you seeing all kinds of things that people are not supposed to see, then or don't usually see, then you could work on the tornado with an EMDR therapist, and gradually your emotional um, reaction to that memory is lessened. It's too much to go into right now, but anyway, it can be very helpful. Um, okay, one more question. Can you pick that out for me, camera? Um, Hey, Mandy again. I walk outside each day. Sunlight is great for depression and anxiety. Grounding is wonderful. Take yourself out for a date. Take risks and live day by day like it was your last. Practice this daily. Exposure therapy helped me so much. Yeah, Mandy, that's a very positive way to end things. Um, yeah, grounding is really important. I mean, if I were sitting here and needed to ground myself, I would feel the weight of my body in the chair. I would notice if I tap on the microphone, what do I hear in here? I would really notice I've got some lights shining on me. I would notice the lights. I would see the lights. I would feel the air around me. I would feel how cold it is or how warm it is. Um, so you're grounding yourself very much in the moment. And so often anxiety takes you out of the moment, takes you either back to the past, depression really does that more, takes you back to the past, or anxiety will take you into the future. You're actually thinking about something that's going to happen that you fear is going to happen in the future. So that's wonderful. And I'm glad, living day by day like it was your last. There's a country song that's about that. Yeah, I can't remember it right now. But anyway, it is practice. In fact, I think any kind of healthy living is practice, and certainly self-esteem. Again, I mentioned before I had a really rough weekend, and one of the things in looking back on it that I did not do because I guess wanted to feel sorry for myself or something was that I didn't live out anything. Well, there was that one day, Saturday. I didn't really do anything that day that might have helped me get focused on my values. I just kind of let myself wallow and then ashamed myself for letting myself wallow. So it was just a bad day in general. Thank God Sunday was different. But we all have those days. So and I'm glad y'all are here for each other. Um, and I appreciate you being here. And again, I'm Dr. Margaret Rutherford, or as people call me on the podcast, Dr. Margaret. I'm on the Self-Work podcast. I will be back here on the Mighty the third Wednesday of the month, so that'll be March. I'm not sure. Gosh, I'm pulling this out of the air, but is it March the 17th? I'm not sure. Anyway, somewhere in there. And it'll be on at 3. Usually we're on at 3:00 Central Standard Time. My Facebook group is facebook.com/groups/selfwork. My Facebook page is Dr. Margaret Rutherford. I'd love to have you over there. I post what I write about, and I post my podcast. I also post things that other people have written that I think could be helpful. And what else? My book, I guess. Did I mention that before? Perfectly Hidden Depression. And I will see all of you next time. Thanks to Camera, who is wonderful at helping me with questions. And really, I couldn't do this without her because I would get quite lost in all that. So thank you so much. And I will see you next week. No, next month. Take care. Bye-bye.